Hello, my name is Barbara Weg, and I'm a certified supply chain professional, and I've prepared a 15-minute presentation on supply chain risk management and reshoring strategies. Just a bit about myself. I have 30 some odd years contract manufacturing experience, about 20 years in the metal finishing and fabrication space, and about 10 years in the personal care and consumer packaged goods space. For the most recent couple of years, I held my first public sector role. That was for a nonprofit that was primarily funded under the Department of Commerce NIST as the supply chain consultant for California's MEP Center. For that role, I mapped critical sectors throughout the state and provided our small to medium-sized manufacturers with supply chain advice and education. In that role, I also had the privilege of authoring the Reshoring Strategy checklist that you can find in Section 3 of the Reshoring Handbook that is published on the SBA's government website. My specialty is global sourcing and procurement, so as you can imagine, I've spent a good portion of my life, particularly since COVID, discussing supply chain risk and reshoring strategies. So let's jump right in. So this is just a standard legal disclaimer and basically let you know that this presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal or financial advice, and that, of course, you should seek out the appropriate professionals regarding your firm's particular needs before making business decisions. So today we're going to briefly discuss a macro view of supply chain risk management, and then we're going to dive into strategic considerations to review before initiating a reshoring strategy. And then we'll conclude by taking a look at some common mistakes that we would like to avoid during that process. When we talk about supply chain risk management, or SCRM, we generally categorize risks into two buckets, those that are internal risks and those that are external risks. The internal risks are those for which an organization has some level of control. These are generally operational in nature. And external risks are those in which an organization generally has very little control, which are usually geopolitical and regulatory in nature. So let's take a quick look at some examples of internal risks. These can reveal themselves as process inefficiencies, such as product coming off the line with quality issues, or even equipment maintenance issues. There are supplier reliability challenges, such as poor performance due to shortages, delivery, or quality issues. There could be compliance challenges related to IT failures, such as cybersecurity issues. There are workforce disruptions, generally related to insufficient training or lack of department succession planning, turnover, or morale issues. And finally, there can be financial risks that are related to cash flow challenges and budget overruns. So now let's take a look at some examples of external risks that might be driving a company or organization to want to de-risk from a particular country or region. The first and most prominent in our daily news cycle lately are those disruptions that are caused by geopolitical and regional instability. We have also all been exposed to tariff volatility and trade policy shifts. It used to be that once a year, importers and exporters would download the harmonized tariff schedule and maybe had one revision throughout the year. As of late November 2025, the U.S. International Trade Commission reported that there were at least 31 revisions to the 2025 harmonized tariff schedule, setting a new record for the most revisions in a single year. Transportation cost increases and delays can occur due to several factors, such as port congestion, labor strikes, or logistical bottlenecks. We currently have a wide variety of ongoing international conflicts that are disrupting many shipping lanes. We had low water levels in the Panama Canal. Some of you may remember when a ship struck a bridge in New Jersey, or most recently in September of last year, when approximately 75 shipping containers fell from a cargo ship into the water at the Port of Long Beach. There are, of course, natural disasters that can have catastrophic impacts on supply chains, causing physical damage to infrastructure, loss of goods, and disruptions in operations. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, and really any severe weather event can create manufacturing and transportation bottlenecks. Another example of an external risk could be demand variability, driven by economic conditions or even a competitor's actions. So this can lead to supply-demand mismatches, overstocking or stockouts, customer or consumer pressures such as demands for ethical sourcing or faster delivery. These can all influence supply chain practices. And finally, there are legal, regulatory, taxation, and customs issues that can affect supply chains through compliance requirements and trade restrictions. So then the big question folks are asking is, if I do want to de-risk from a particular country or region, how do I even begin to build a reshoring strategy? So for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus on reshoring topics surrounding strategic planning and feasibility, and that will include a touch on sourcing and procurement. You can see here there are many components to evaluate and consider during the reshoring process. So I will just briefly mention the other items on this list, but they will be addressed in future videos. So you can see here there are considerations regarding supplier sourcing and procurement, site selection and infrastructure, cost and financial planning, workforce and talent, technology and automation, legal, regulatory, and compliance, and finally, communication and change management. So let's start with strategic planning and feasibility. The first step we want to take is to define our reshoring objectives. Is it cost reduction? Is it quality control? Is it proximity to market? Or is it regarding needing to meet some form of compliance? Maybe you're part of the supply chain for a domestic infrastructure project and are subject to the BABA Act, Build America, Buy America Act. Understanding your objectives will be your jumping off point for planning. Next is to identify your pain points. For example, delays. We spoke about shipping lane and transportation disruptions. Increased costs regarding tariffs. Maybe you're having quality issues with your international supplier, or maybe your supplier is in a region that has geopolitical unrest. Then you want to conduct a total cost of ownership analysis versus offshore operations. Many companies only calculate landed costs, but do not consider the true cost of offshore versus domestic production, which includes sometimes many variable and hidden costs that are not always captured in calculations. For example, offshore costs usually include variables like freight, tariffs, duties, and last mile trucking. Generally, hidden costs include inventory holding expenses, lead times, intellectual property risks, and those costs that are associated with the potential disruptions we discussed above. These are all important considerations during the planning stage. And you can see here that I included a link to an online TCO estimator to help you make those calculations. Then we want to identify and map out which raw materials, components, or processes are most critical to reshore first. I like to suggest to focus on high impact items, those with high transportation costs, quality concerns, long lead times, or those essential to core products, prioritized by strategic value. Some procurement professionals like to employ the 80-20 rule. That usually tells us to look at the top 80% of spend. And while that can work very well for many, you can run the risk of missing critical items. So I like to suggest that folks also prioritize those raw materials, components, and processes that contribute to the largest chunk of your revenue. This is where you can find that an inexpensive component, while not necessarily a large part of your spend, is holding up the shipment of a high value finished good like a submarine or an aircraft. And I think we've all either heard or experienced this very thing. Next, we want to assess the impact on lead times, inventory, and supply chain resilience. How do we ensure domestic suppliers can meet our quality, capacity, and lead times? These are where supplier relationship management comes into focus. Conduct supplier qualification audits. Ask for capability statements, certifications, ISO, ITAR, and the like. Perform sample runs and get references. Start small with a pilot or phased approach. From planning to production, a reshoring transition, even for a simple component, can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending upon complexity, tooling needs, regulatory approvals, and production volume. This is when we generally expect longer lead times early on and then prepare for a detailed ramp-up plan. For much of last year, we were recommending companies take a look at restructuring their sourcing and inventory strategies by taking a multi-pronged approach. Review terms for exit clauses or renegotiation options with current suppliers. If contracts are involved, of course, you're going to consult your legal counsel. Using these transition agreements or multi-sourcing strategies to minimize disruption. You could take a look at starting with a hybrid model of domestic and offshore suppliers to balance risk and cost. Many firms dual source high-risk items or designate domestic sources for short lead time needs and offshore sources for high volume runs until a cost-effective domestic source can be qualified. Determine feasibility of reshoring entire operations or select components. Of course, we all know that reshoring an entire operation does not happen with a flip of the switch. Some key considerations and potential challenges could entail initial operational disruptions. So the transition phase of reshoring can lead to temporary delays in production and logistics as new facilities are established. There could be initial higher production costs. While logistics costs may decrease, companies often face higher labor and operational costs domestically. There are initial resource constraints. Recruiting, training, and setting up infrastructure can be time-consuming and expensive. So the key takeaway here is that shifting supply chain networks requires careful planning. And lastly, but most important, is to evaluate the impact on customer service levels and time to market. Will you achieve faster, more reliable deliveries? Shorter, less complex supply chains mean reduced lead times and in many cases enhanced deliver in full and on-time metrics. There is the opportunity to enjoy improved product quality. Closer proximity to manufacturing allows for stricter oversight, fewer defects, and better adherence to standards, which reduces returns and enhances brand reputation. Another benefit could be enhanced responsiveness and customization. Companies can react faster to market trends and allow for increases or decreases in volume to match demand as they are not restricted by long shipping times. So we're going to conclude with common reshoring mistakes or misconceptions. First, of course, is not understanding the total cost of ownership. Underestimating supplier qualification timelines and rushing transitions without the appropriate supplier vetting. Ignoring the domestic ecosystem regarding capacity constraints, including technology and automation, as well as regulatory compliance. Ignoring workforce readiness and not performing supply chain risk analysis. And lastly, underestimating the change management effort. It is vital to engage internal teams early in the reshoring planning process. Communicate strategy and rationale to customers, investors, and suppliers. Plan a change management strategy to support organizational transition. Set clear KPIs and success metrics for reshoring implementation, and establish a reshoring project management team with clear accountability. All those considerations and efforts will help companies avoid the most common pitfalls when it comes to reshoring. So that's all I have for today. Please check back for additional videos regarding reshoring strategic planning. My contact information is included here, and I welcome any feedback or questions. Thank you for watching.